Hey, what is going on everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be adding some functionality to the buttons that we created in the previous video, and we'll be installing a math parser, which we'll be using to evaluate the equations that we put in this display up here. This should be a really easy tutorial, so let's get started. So the first thing that I'd like to get done is adding some functionality to our buttons, so when we click them, something actually happens. The way we can do this is by clicking our button. If we come over to the attributes panel and then scroll down to common attributes, you'll see there's this on-click listener slot. If we click this drop down, there's nothing here. What I want to do is populate our main activity.java file with a bunch of methods that we can call, and then we'll link each of these methods to their corresponding button. So the way we can do that is by coming over to the main activity.java file. Then within here, we're going to want to define a unique method for each of our buttons that we created in our XML file. So to start off, I just want to create one method to show you what this is going to look like. So outside of the onCreate method, we're going to type in public void, because we don't want to return anything. And then we have to assign it a name. So I'm going to make a method for the 0 button. You can name this whatever you want, but naming it 0 button just kind of makes a little bit more sense. So 0 button, and then within the arguments, you have to pass in a view. So we're going to type in view, and then we'll just name it view. And then we'll do open closing brackets and then hit enter. So now whenever the 0 button is pressed, the code within here is going to be what's executed. But before that happens, we actually have to take this method and assign it to our 0 button in the XML. The way we go about doing that is by accessing the attributes assigned to our 0 button. You can just click it, come over to the attributes panel, scroll all the way back down to common attributes. And if you remember from the beginning of this video, we mentioned the on-click listener that was assigned to a button. And when we click this drop down, nothing was there. But since we just created a public method within our main activity, that method now appears here and we can click it, which will assign that method to our 0 button. So now whenever the 0 button is pressed, the method that we just created will be called and all the code within there will be executed. So you are going to have to do this for each button that we created within the XML. Instead of having you watch me type this all out, I'm just going to speed it up, so I'll be right back. All right, so I went through and added in all of the methods that we needed for the individual buttons in our XML and assigned those methods to each button within here. So if we come back, before we actually start writing code for our methods within here, we're gonna wanna grab the edit text that we made in the previous videos, this guy right here. The way we go about doing that is by creating an instance of the edit text class. So we're gonna type in private, edit text, and we're just gonna name it display. You can name it whatever you want. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to assign display to the specific edit text that we created in a previous video. So the way we go about doing that is by typing in find view by ID, r.id, and then whatever we named it. It looks like we named it input, but I'm just going to double check. The ID is input. Sweet. So r.id.input if you're using the same exact ID that I had. And what this is going to do is it's going to grab that specific view within our XML and just assign it to this variable. Now you'll notice that we do have a warning here. Android Studio wants us to convert this to a local variable because in reality we are only using this once within the onCreate method. We're not using it anywhere else, so it does make sense to do that. But eventually we are going to use this variable within the other methods, so leave it as is. All right, now that we have the edit text that we created within our XML file linked up to our variable that we have in our Java file, we can actually start working with it. The first thing that I'd like to do is actually clearing the edit text when the user clicks on it to type in their equation. So I pulled up the emulator from the previous video, and you'll notice when we click here, the enter in a value is still there. You're gonna have to actually erase this all yourself, which will probably get annoying really quick. So I'd like that to just be erased when the user clicks on it. So the way we can do this is by setting an on-click listener for our display. What that's going to do is it's going to listen for click events within our display. So the way we set up our on-click listener for our display is by typing in display.set on-click listener. So we scroll down there, hit enter, and then within the parentheses, we're going to have to type in a new view.onClick listener. So this first one right here. Hit enter and it's going to fill in a bunch of code for you. So within the onClick method, we're going to actually have a if statement that's going to check whether or not the string we have in our resource file. So if we open that up, we have this one here, the string. with a name of display. We're going to check for this string. If that's within our display, we're going to clear it. So the way we can do that is by using an if statement. So we want to check for is to see if the string stored within our display is equal to the string that's within our resource file. We can do that by grabbing the string in our resource file by using the getString method, and we'll type in r.string.display because that's the name we gave the string that we want to check for. And if we come back, so if that is equal to whatever is in the display, so we can grab the string stored in the display by typing in display.getText, and then we have to convert that text into a string. So we're going to use the .toString method, and then we'll use our open closing brackets. And then if that is true, we're going to want to clear the display. So we can type in display.setText, and then we're just going to set it to an empty string. So now if we run the emulator, so we have this open, if we click this, now the edit text is cleared when the user first clicks on it. So if I typed in a bunch of stuff here, we can drop this down. If I click on it again, it's not cleared because it doesn't match the string within our strings resource file. So the next question is, how do we get rid of this default keyboard from popping up so we're able to use our buttons that we created within our XML? So the way we can go about doing that is by using this really long method. So after we assign a view to our display, we can type in display dot, and now here's the really long method. It's set show soft input on focus, and then we're going to type in false because we don't want it to pop up. So now if we stop the emulator, we can run it again. Now if we click this, the default keyboard no longer pops up. All right, as of now, the display is done. The next thing that I'd like to do is make it so our button functions actually add the correct number to the display. So how I want to go about doing that is by creating another method that will update the display that we created up here. So I'm going to go private. We don't want to return anything, so we're going to go void, and we'll just go update text. And then this update text method, what it's going to do is take in a new string. So we'll call it string, and then we'll call it string to add. So this variable is going to be what we're adding to our display. And then within here, we're going to need to set a few more variables. We're going to grab the old string. So we'll go old string, and we'll set that equal to our display dot, we're going to get the text. So scroll down, get text, and then we have to convert that to a string. So this will grab whatever text is in our display and store it into this variable here. We're going to need the cursor position because we'll just do this. So if we had our cursor right in the middle here and the user presses the 0 button, we don't want the 0 to be placed all the way at the end. We want it to be placed in the middle. So we're going to grab the cursor position, and then we're going to split this string up into two different strings. So you see what I mean in just a little bit. So we're going to grab the position of the cursor. Cursor position is going to be equal to the display, and then the way you grab the cursor's position is with the get selection start method. And then we're going to split up our old string into the different halves that I showed you earlier. So we'll go string, and then we'll go left string, and then we'll set that equal to, so we'll have the old string, and we'll create a substring of that string, and then we're going to go from the index of 0 all the way up to the cursor's position. So the start of that, and then the right half is going to be the old string, and then again we'll create another substring of this, and then we're going to go from the cursor position all the way to the end, so we can just type in the cursor position. So that's going to grab the rest of it. So just again, if we typed in a bunch of random stuff and the cursor was in between B and F, the left string variable is going to store this half of the string. So that's what this part is doing. And then the right half will be this half here. Then what we're going to want to do is update the display with this new string. So we're going to go display.setText, and then we're going to format a string. So we're going to go string.format, and it's going to take the format of 3 different strings. So we're going to go %s 3 times, and we'll do a comma, and then we're going to take the left half of the string. So if we, again, we're going to place a 0 here, for instance, we're going to take the left half first, and then we're going to place in our string to add. So this is the new string, or the 0 for our example. So string to add, and then we'll finish it off by tacking on the right half of the string. So we can get rid of this, we don't need that anymore. So this function should update our display according to wherever the cursor position is. So what I'm going to do is go through each of our methods here and then use our update text function that we just created. So for example, if we wanted to add a 0 to the display, all we have to do is place in a string of 0 here. So I'm going to go through the rest of our button functions and add our update text function so the buttons can actually add the correct character to the display. Alright, so I finished doing that. There are a few things that I did do that I want to point out. For the clear button, I just made the string an empty string, so there's nothing on the display. The parentheses I left blank because we're going to have to create some logic that determines whether or not it's an open or closing parenthesis. And then the equal button I left blank because we need to download a math parser to evaluate our expression. And then for the backspace button, we're going to have to do a few things differently to update the text for that. Alright, so let's come up to the top right hand corner. We're going to run our emulator and make sure that our function is actually working. Alright, so it finally loaded up. So again, if we click our display, it clears the text that was preloaded in here. And now if we come down and click an 8 is added in, but you'll notice that our cursor is being shifted to the left. So it is getting placed in a little bit funky, but if I go in between the 8 and a 9, we can place a 1 in between there. So we're going to have to update our cursor position so it stays where it's at and doesn't jump to the end of our string. Alright, so let's close out of the emulator and then we can fix that problem right now. Okay, to fix the cursor position, what we're going to want to do is increase whatever position it's at by 1. So it's not too difficult to fix, so all we have to do is go display dot set the selection. So like above, we grab the selection start, but in this case, we're going to set it. And then we'll grab whatever the cursor's position was, and we'll just increase that by 1. But now we do have a slight issue is with like the clear button. So what I'm going to do is come down here, and we're not even going to use the method for the clear button. What I want to do is just go display dot set text, and then we're just going to set it to an empty string. So we're not even going to use the function that we created earlier. We're just going to set the text right in the button function. And then what I'd like to do is, so you don't have to click on the display every time to clear it, I'm going to add in an if statement is to check whether or not the default text within the display is there. The way we can do that is by referencing our string resource. So if we come down here, we have our display, and then this text is preloaded into our display. So I'd like to make it so we can change this and not have to come back to our Java code. You always want to reference your resources. So the way we can do that within code is by using the getString function. So we'll go getString, and all we have to do is go r.id. Whatever we named the string. So in our case, we named it display. Oh, it's not r.id, it's r.string.display. So this will grab whatever string we place in here, and then we just want to see if that is equal to, so dot equals, and then we're going to go display dot get the text, and then we have to convert that to a string. So if that's equal, we want to run this. So we'll go display dot set text, and then within here we'll just place in the string to add. So it'll be like the first number or character that the user wants to add into the display. Now if the user already has characters on there, so we'll go else, so the default message isn't in the display, then we want to run this code here. So we'll save this. I want to make sure that we actually updated the clear. We updated that. So we should be good. I'm going to run the emulator now and then test to make sure that this works. So now if I press a button, this should clear it and then add that in here. Oh, but we forgot to add our cursor in there. So that's going to, hold on, let's fix that real quick. So when we scroll back up, we need to move the cursor position up 1 when we do that as well. So we'll save this and run it again. All right, so now we hit an 8. Now the cursor is all the way to the right, and we can keep typing in numbers here, and the cursor will stay in that position. But if we place in a 1 in between the 8 and the 7, the cursor will also stay there, and we can keep placing in numbers at that spot. And then the clear button clears it, and we can keep putting in numbers. So everything looks like it's working. All right, so then the next thing is to make sure our parenthesis and backspace button works. So I want to add the logic to those functions down here. All right, so let's first add in the backspace logic. The first thing we're going to want to do is make sure we get the cursor's position. So again, we're going to go int cursor position, and the way we grab that is by going display dot get selection start. So that'll grab the cursor's current position. And then what I also want to do is make sure that we're grabbing the length of whatever text is in the display. The reason for that is because we don't want the user to be able to try and backspace when the display is empty, because we're going to need to shift the cursor's position and we'll end up getting an index error. So we'll go display.getText, and then to grab the length, we're just going to go .length, and that'll store the length of the text in the display into this variable that we created here. And then we're going to use an if statement. So as long as the cursor's position is not equal to 0 and the text length is also not equal to 0. So if that is true, we're going to run the code in here. And then we're going to use a new class. We're going to go a spannable string builder. What this is going to allow us to do is replace different characters within our string. So we're going to call this selection. And that'll be equal to the display.getText. And I believe this wants us to cast on that. Yep. So you have to cast this string builder onto our display.getText. And then down here, this is where the string builder class is real nice. We can go selection.replace. So then in the replace function, we have to create a selection. So like if we were going to replace a character within this replace word here, and the cursor was right here, we're going to select the character that we want to replace. So the way we go about doing that is by going cursor position -1. So from that index all the way up to the cursor's position, we want to replace that character with an empty string to delete it. And then all we have to do is update our display. So display.setText, and we're going to set the text to the selection. And then don't forget, we have to update our cursor's position. So set selection, and then we're going to go the cursor's position. And then instead of adding 1, since we deleted a character, we're going to have to subtract 1 this time. So now if we save and run this, we can test our backspace button and make sure that this is working. So it pops up, we'll place in a few values here, and we'll hit the backspace button, and you'll see that it works just fine. All right, so then the next thing that I want to do is add the logic to our parentheses. Since we only have one parenthesis button and not two, we have to determine whether or not it's an open or closing parenthesis. So there are a few variables that I want to declare. So we're going to grab the position of the cursor again. So we're going to go cursor position, and then display.getSelectionStart to grab the cursor's position. And then I want to keep track of the amount of open parentheses and closed parentheses that we have to the left of the cursor. So we're going to go open parenthesis, set that equal to 0, and we'll have a closed parenthesis as well. Set that also equal to 0. Then there's one last thing we're going to need, and it's the length of whatever text is in the display. So let's just call it text length. And we'll set that equal to display.getText, and then again we'll type in length, and then again we'll use the length function to grab the length of the text in there. And now what I want to do is increase the open parenthesis and close parenthesis variables depending on where the cursor is. So this will start making a lot more sense once we start writing some code. So we're going to create a general for loop. So int I equals 0. We want to run this loop while I is less than the cursor's position, because we want to see how many open parentheses and closed parentheses we have to the left of our cursor. And then we'll go I++ to increase that value. Oh, it's not closed parenthesis, it's the cursor position. And we'll close that off. And then in here, we're going to have an if statement that is going to check whether or not we have an open parenthesis or a closed parenthesis, and it will increase these variables accordingly, so we can figure out how many we have. So we'll go if the display.getText, and then .toString, and we have to have a substring of that, and then the substring that we want is from index of I all the way up to I+1, and then if that equals an open parenthesis, then what we want to do is increase our open parenthesis variable by 1. Then we can copy this. Then we're going to grab the text again. We're going to create a substring of that from I to I+1. And then if that equals a closed parenthesis, we're going to go close parenthesis plus equals 1. So if I create a simple expression here, if we had this, if we had like 8 plus 9 times 7. So it's going to start at the index of 0, so where our cursor is now, and then this is going to create a substring from the index of 0 to 1, so it's essentially going to highlight this character, and then it's going to check to see if that character is either an open or closing parenthesis, and if it is, it will increase our variables accordingly. So this one would increase our open parenthesis, the next iteration would see it's an 8, nothing would happen, the plus, the 9, nothing would happen, and then it would see that this is a closed parenthesis and increase this variable here until it finished off this expression. So we're going to use these two variables to determine whether or not we need to use an open or closing parenthesis, because by the end of it, they should be equal to one another. So outside of the for loop, we're going to create another if statement. So we go if the open parenthesis is equal to the closed parentheses, or the display, so we're going to grab the text in the display again, .getText, and we have to convert it to a string. Then we're going to take a substring of that, and then the substring is going to be the text length minus 1 all the way up to the text length, so one character within there. And then if that equals our open parenthesis, then we're going to want to update our text. So we're going to use our update text function that we created, and we're just going to want to add in an open parenthesis. And don't forget, we have to increase the cursor's position. So we're going to go display dot set selection. Then we're going to take in the cursor's position and increase that value by 1. Then we can copy this and then use this logic to determine whether or not we want to add in a closed parenthesis. So if the closed parenthesis, we're going to change it up a little bit, is less than the open parenthesis, so there's less of them. Oh, we should make this an else if. So we'll change this to open parenthesis, so if they're not equal to one another essentially, and this substring is not equal to an open parenthesis, then what we want to do is set our text to a closing parenthesis and then increase our cursor position by 1 again. And then come to think of it, we can actually take this, copy that, and we can just save a few lines here and just add this at the end. All right, so that looks good. So then if we save and run this, we can come over to the emulator, make sure that our parentheses are actually working. So if we do this, so we hit it twice, we get 2 opening. We can do 8 plus 9, we get a close, and then we can divide that by like 9, finish that off. So it looks like the logic for our parenthesis button is working. Now in this video, I would like to add the logic for our equals button, but we do have to download and add a new package into our Android project to do that. Since this video is starting to get rather long, I'm going to end it here, and in the next video, we'll be wrapping up the calculator app. If you did make it this far in the series, thanks for watching. These videos do take a long time to make. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content like this.